and welcome to our LinkedIn Live today. We are going to be talking about the topic of understanding your power. And we have two incredible guests today. We have Patty Pfeffer de Vries, as well as Jeffrey Pfeffer. You're going to hear a little bit more about them in just a moment. But before we begin, as always, please go ahead and enter into the comments where you're coming from. I know we've got an international audience today. And Patty, let's start first with you. Where are you coming from today?
From Santa Cruz County, California.
And how about you, Jeffrey?
I'm at Stanford. I'm on the Stanford campus. It's Stanford, California. Many people believe we're in Palo Alto, but Stanford has its own zip code, and it is not part of Palo Alto because Stanford is way too high status to be part of anything other than Stanford.
You know, Jeffrey, that was one of the first things that I learned when I first went to Stanford was that Stanford had its own zip code, or not its own zip code, but it was kind of, its own entity, not part of Palo Alto. So we've got JD Schramm. I know someone that you know, Jeffrey, coming in from San Rafael. We've got Cam coming in from Calgary. We've got Lindsay coming in from San Diego. We've got Ronan coming in from Dublin, Ireland. We've got it looks like Jessica coming in from Gilroy. So lots of people who are coming in. So a reminder to all of our listeners, as always, please submit your comments and your questions. Both Patty and Jeffrey are excited to be with you and are happy to answer any of your questions. So let me start with our introductions here. First, I would like for you to meet Dr. Jeffrey Pfeffer. He is professor of organizational behavior at Stanford University Graduate School of Business, author of 16 books, including 7 Rules of Power, his most recent book, as well as one we'll be talking about today, Dying for a Paycheck. He hosts the Pfeffer on Power podcast. He's a global expert on leadership, power, and workplace health. And one of the things that I love about Jeffrey, and I'm just meeting him for the first time, Jeffrey, thank you so much for being with us, is just how candid he is, how provocative he is, something that I think that we really need. And I think that he really helps us to see leadership development in a whole different way, and a way that we really need to be seeing it. So welcome, Jeffrey. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to meet you, and it's a pleasure to be part of the Patty de Vries show.
And then there is the one and only Patty de Vries. And Patty's superpower, amongst many, is that if Patty says, "Will you be here?" people will be there. So Patty, it's so nice to have you. Patty is the Chief Experience Officer and co-founder of Living Well USA. I really encourage you to check out their website, livingwellusa.com. There's lots of team opportunities around team development and particularly diving into neuro-literacy. She also has a course that starts on Tuesday, a 6-week course, which I encourage you all to enroll in. And AJ will be putting those links in the chat here. She is the author of The Soft Side of Success. And, Patty, I think about you a lot. One of your superpowers is that you're really, really good at not only fostering connections, but really continuing those. And one of the ways that you do is with the power of a thank you note, something that I really try to follow your lead on. Former 9-time NCAA All-American, because once is not enough. Why not 9 times? And she specializes in neuro-literacy and the evolution of our human experience. She brings a science-driven approach to enhancing well-being and leadership potential. So let's begin with talking about power. Something, Jeffrey, you noted that this is a dirty word. We can talk about money, we can talk about sex, but people don't want to talk about power, but we're going to be talking about power. So Patty, over to you first, just high level, what are some thoughts that you have around this notion of power?
Well, I want to start with saying how much I love one of your quotes, Jeffrey, that I read recently, that if power is to be used for good, more good people need power. And that's sort of the space I'm finding myself in, and is after seeing the election, after seeing the fall of so many in power and the rise of others, and seeing the transitory nature of power, my kind of quest is to understand how we as individuals can find our power. I believe we all have it in us. You said earlier, before we got on the show, you made a comment that I'm a force of nature. And I believe for so many reasons that nature, that power that I have inside of me is just because I've tapped into it. And I believe all of us have the ability to tap into that power.
I love that idea of really finding that source of what really nurtures that power in each and every one of us. So, Jeffrey, I'd love to hear your thoughts on power. And of course, you have a very popular class at Stanford Graduate School of Business, Paths to Power. And I know that it is both popular, but also controversial. And in fact, I love your disclaimer. This class is not for everyone. But talk with us a little bit about power.
Power is the ability to get things done against opposition. It does not really matter how wonderful your ideas are. There will always be people who don't like them. I see this, I first met Patty when she was involved in the wellness initiatives at Stanford. And you might think, who can be opposed to wellness, or who could stand in the way of wellness? And the answer is, there are issues of budget. There are issues of, if you're serious about wellness, maybe you need to redesign the work environment. So it does not matter really what you're doing. There will always be some people who are not happy about it. And so power is the ability to get things done against that level of opposition. And therefore, we all need power because we live, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending upon your perspective, in an interdependent world where what we're able to accomplish depends upon the actions of other people, and we need to learn how to influence those other people.
And Jeffrey, this notion of really seeing power for what it is and accepting that power is critical is, I think, particularly important for a lot of women. I know that one of the comments on your book was by a woman just about describing how she had felt like she needed to be collaborative and nice. But it's really about understanding your power and maximizing that. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, I think Patty's a good example of that. I mean, she began by talking about, leaning into your power and being comfortable with being powerful. I think women, and for that matter, underrepresented minorities and oftentimes immigrants, believe they should be seen and not heard. They oftentimes take themselves out of the power equation by not being comfortable with being seen as powerful. I think many people, both men and women, are trained almost from the time they begin school to be likable. In the words of my dear friend Gary Lubman, who used to run Harrah's Entertainment, you want to be like a dog. A dog will love you unconditionally. Your job as a leader is not to win a popularity contest, but to make things happen, to get things done. And so I think I think one of the hard lessons is that you have to do what you need to do. My favorite song, which you have to be as old as I am to remember, there was a man who played a kid in Ozzie and Harriet, went on to be a rock star, named Ricky Nelson. Ricky Nelson wrote a song and did a song called Garden Party. And in Garden Party, there is the reprise, the chorus, can't please everyone, so you've got to please yourself. And I really believe that is something that people, I think women in particular are socialized to try to please others, please their boyfriends, please their significant others, please whatever. And I think that disempowers them. You can't please everyone. You need to please yourself.
And you were making the comment about Patty really working her efforts to promote well-being at Stanford. And I think it's interesting. This is an industry that is dominated by women, and lots of women who seek to be likable. And Patty, I'm just curious if there was a transition for you around a transition from trying to be likable to really being effective in promoting well-being at Stanford.
That's a great question. And I think it's just been an ongoing journey to really get more and more comfortable at every level I found myself at. Laura, from being an athlete in high school and then in college, at the level that we competed in. Once we've competed at a level, we can continue on at that same level in other areas of our life. And so that was really a nice way for both of us, right, to gain that exposure and that power. The more I got to know myself and the more I went inside to please myself, as Jeffrey would said, in terms of what I accomplished, it came to that really difficult moment where I realized that I would never please other people until I started pleasing myself. And that impacts everything. When I started to do the work because it brought me joy, when I started creating projects that brought me joy, when I started cooking to bring me that enjoyment, other people enjoyed it more. And so my power is getting things done because I'm excited about the journey. I'm excited about the project. I'm excited about what I'm doing. And other people join in because they feel and experience that energy and that power that goes from that momentum.
So we really do need to bring more of that power mindset to becoming more effective in promoting well-being in the workplace. So let's start to drill down a little bit more into what's actually happening in the workplace. So Jeffrey, the research that you did along with Joel Go and Stefanos Zenios that looked at the fact that it is the workplace itself that is causing an enormous amount of psychosocial stress and likely resulting in at least 120,000 needlessly lost lives. This is what you describe as literally, people are literally dying for a paycheck. So can you talk us through that a little bit, Jeffrey?
Well, we know that stress has two effects on health. One is when you are stressed out or depressed, and the stress and depression tend to be related. When you're stressed out and depressed, you are more likely to engage in unhealthy behaviors like smoking, drinking, overeating, taking drugs, etc. And secondly, we know increasingly through research done in the medical profession that if you are under stress and depression, that affects your central nervous system and affects the regulation of your hormones and your biochemistry. And so we know that stress is harmful to health. There's no question about that. And we also know that we spend a lot of time at work, and work can often be a source of stress. People get laid off. That's stressful. People find conflicts between their work schedules and their work requirements and the needs to deal with family responsibilities. People often do not have sufficient control over their work. The absence of job control, most people experience as stressful. People are facing long hours. And so the workplace is an important source of stress and the psychosocial consequences that come from stress. And unfortunately, relatively few organizations do much about this because in many respects, you can externalize the cost of all of this. So if Patty is an employee at Pfeffer Enterprises and I work Patty to death, that's okay because she's dead. But if I work Patty into a state of enormous ill health, where she's incurring enormous amounts of medical expenses, it's not my problem because she will be too sick to work. She will leave her employment and she becomes a cost on society. So very much as in the olden days, we had environmental pollution until we cleaned up the environment and put in environmental regulations. We now have what my colleague at ESA, Nuria Chinchilla, calls social pollution. And very much in the same way, we dropped toxic waste into the environment. We now drop people who are too mentally or physically incapacitated to work into the larger society.
So we have social pollution, and meanwhile, in the world of workplace well-being, the world that Patty and I have been in, as well as a lot of our listeners here, this keeps getting framed up as personal responsibility. You just need to have a more positive mindset. You need to be more resilient. You need to, download our mindfulness app. You need to take advantage of our employee assistance program. So, Patty, can you speak a little bit to that? I mean, clearly these root causes, things like long hours, lack of control, have nothing to do with the individual, have everything to do with the organization itself. And of course, the leaders. Talk a little bit about, the world that we're in of workplace well-being. Is it potentially doing more harm than good?
Well, I think there's a couple ways to look at it. And I wouldn't certainly say that it's 100% the organization either. I believe all of us come into an organization with our own beliefs, our own, and sometimes toxic behaviors, and we influence others in that. And so I believe it's two-part. I believe each of us have the opportunity to own how we show up, to own how we exist in the world, to manage the power that we have, because oftentimes unmanaged, that power comes out and it becomes the toxic work relationship. And so my goal is to help leaders understand how their energy is spread through an organization, either in a good way or in a toxic way, that either spreads fear among the employees or it helps build them up and helps them own their power. Too often I see organizations that work in fear. And so all the employees have believed for too long that they're powerless, have believed that they have no choice, have believed that they don't have a voice. And my hope is that we will come out of this sort of dark area in time where many of us have been depressed. Many of us have lost our connection with the power that we have, and that we can start reconnecting to that natural energy force that we have and start standing up for ourselves, start saying no to the toxic environments that are hurting us and literally killing us. So it is two-part. We can't blame the organization. And I was privileged enough to step away from my full-time job. I was a director at Stanford, and I felt that I was just not finding the direction I needed to move on. I was finding more roadblocks than I was finding opportunities. And I knew that I wasn't my best self. I wasn't exerting my power that I have in an environment that had closed so many doors. And so for me, my power was stepping away. For me, my power is helping other people find their voice again, because that's how we create a beautiful life for ourselves, is when we set the boundaries, we know what we're capable of, and then we come every day and give our gifts to the world.
So it's two parts. Go ahead.
I think Patty really makes a very important point. So people always ask me, what should they do if they're in an environment which is causing them stress and depression? And I say to them, if I put you in a room and the room began to fill with smoke, what the hell would you do? You would leave the room. And I think that is exactly you. And I think, I think the ability and the strength and the personal resilience to say, look, this is not my fault that I am under, working in a toxic workplace. I was probably recruited under a variety of false pretenses. But once you find you're in a place where you cannot be effective, you need to leave.
Is that a privilege?
And not, by the way, not blame it on yourself either. You need to leave and say, it's not my fault.
But I'm just curious, Patty, you had the opportunity, and perhaps we might even frame it up as a privilege, to be able to leave. You had opportunities. Is that always the case, that somebody realistically, practically speaking, can leave a toxic environment? Jeffrey, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Sorry. And then we'll hear from you, Patty.
Patty's about to say something. So.
Yes, go ahead, Patty.
Well, what I wanted to say is that, a simple way of looking at stress is the difference between where things are and where we want things to be, right? And so when we're in that place, we may not be able to physically leave the job, but then we can change the story about why we're there. We can look at the reasons we're there. We have the ability to make choices, and there's oftentimes those choices that keep us stuck, right? We talk about the golden handcuffs. We talk about the kind of lifestyle we want. And so we stay in situations because the benefit outweighs, in some ways, that 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 pain that we're going through. We can also look at it differently. My husband looks at me funny. One day he said to me, and he goes, you're just so lucky you get to do everything you want every day. And I said, really? Well, you're right, because I've reframed yard work and weed whacking and pulling weeds and building hillsides into decorating the land and making it accessible for our guests. You're right. I love doing that every day. But it's not because the work's any less hard. It's because I've found a different story to tell, because what I want is to enjoy working on the hillside, being outside. And so what story are we telling ourselves about the job? We know that Sonia Lyubomirsky's work, that even if we find our dream job, our dream title, our dream amount of money, within 6 months to a year after we get that position, we will find reasons to be unhappy. So how can we, again, show up as our best self, knowing the positive psychology, knowing who we are at our core, so that we can show up centered in our power?
So we do always have that power as individuals in terms of how we respond and even how we reframe the story that we're telling ourselves. But can we talk a little bit about, Jeffrey, you make the case that companies are not being held to account. So, why is that? And what kinds of laws and regulations do we need to have in place? And in what ways are our organizations and their leaders, in fact, responsible?
Well, organizations, my friend Bob Chapman, who wrote a book called Everybody Matters, has a lovely phrase of this, that when employees come to work in the morning, they have entrusted their both physical and psychological well-being to you. And very much as you can seek to be a good steward of the physical environment, you can be a good or bad or poor steward of the lives that have been entrusted to you. And so I hope it would be nice if organizational leaders said, people have really placed a lot of confidence and faith and responsibility in me, and I'm going to take those responsibilities seriously. If they don't, then there are all kinds of other issues. It's interesting that the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, in theory, and I emphasize the word in theory, has the potential to, in fact, deal with psychosocial stressors at work, because OSHA, in fact, is in charge of workplace well-being. The problem is OSHA is underfunded, and we are in a moment, particularly after the last election, in which there's going to be more deregulation rather than regulation. So I do not hold up many prospects for this. Unions, of course, at one time were very, very active in the movement to remove physical issues at work, like chemical spills and unsafe physical practices. Unions are also very concerned, I think, about well-being, but unions are also a relatively weak force in today's economy. So many of the things that in the past pushed organizations to do a better job of being good stewards of their employees' lives have gone down. I am pushing for, I haven't found anybody to do it. They do it in other countries, that when, the workplace stress and depression are as harmful to health as secondhand smoke, known and regulated carcinogen. I'm waiting for somebody, some district attorney, to basically arrest the CEO for murder, because by looking at mortality statistics and statistics, on the illness statistics and whatever. So if I took out a gun or if I took out a knife and stabbed Patty, I would be arrested. If I put Patty in a workplace in which she's given an impossible job to do, harassed because sexual and other forms of harassment, most people experience as stressful. That's another. And by the way, sexual harassment has, in addition to everything else, a health consequence. That's been studied, not surprisingly. It would be nice if I put Patty in situations in which I harmed her with almost as much predictability as if I stabbed her. I was held to criminal account for this. You put one CEO in jail, things will change in a hurry.
Which I know did happen in France, did it not?
That's correct. That's correct. The French
So
telecom.
it has been done before, but yet to be done here in the United States. So What are, one of the things that you talk about, Jeffrey, and I also want to make sure that we get a question that just came in from Ping Lu, but I want to, you talk about how there are, in fact, small actions that leaders can take to make a difference. And Patty, I know this is something that you really speak to as well. So small but important actions like prioritizing what matters. Jeffrey, you talk about this idea of finding a mantra to, quote, ladder up to. Let's start with you first, Patty. Can you give us like one small action that a leader can take to make a difference?
Just progressively getting to know yourself better, being open to changing your mind about who you are, questioning your stories, and also questioning, your beliefs and how you show up, getting curious about your triggers. I think that's a good place to start. It's just really getting to know yourself.
And that's the neuro-literacy that you're really focused on in your work.
Neuro-literacy,
Jeffrey,
yeah, it's cool, like positive psychology, like, reflection, where you get to know yourself. Yeah, absolutely.
And Jeffrey, what are your thoughts on a small action?
It's interesting. When Amir Rubin became head of Stanford Healthcare, the job that he's now long left, one of the things that he did was, and one of the things he did when he was CEO of One Medical, is to figure out, everybody says physician burnout is inevitable. It is not. So the question is, if I've got Patty doing a job, what elements of that job can I remove or automate? What elements, how many meetings are actually critical? If I ask her to do something, is it really essential? So much of work is waste. There's so much wasted inefficiency and wasted meetings and wasted activities, and we have, the first thing I would ask people to do, if I said I'm going to give you a computer or a glass or a dish or something, and I'm going to do this without any customer input, you would say you're nuts, because we've taken customer-centered design into, it's become taken for granted. I would argue you ought to have employee-centered job design. You ought to ask your employees, what can we do to change how we're doing the work to make it easier for you, more efficient for you? How do we remove some of the burdens that actually don't add anything to productivity, but are just there because organizations are like caves filled with stalactites and stalagmites, the residue of policies and processes and procedures that don't add any value? How can we basically redesign work from the human being out, as opposed to, taking somebody like Laura or Patty, putting them in a job and say, fit in?
And my previous guest, Bridget Schulte, and Jeffrey, I know you know her,
I know her very well.
Of the most recent book, Overwork. She talks about the idea that the way we are working, for the most part, is not working, but it can work. And so this really is, if we really are authentic about really improving people's health and well-being when they're at work, then we would be wise to really focus on how the work gets done, aka the job design. So I want to make sure that we get, we had a couple of questions, one around growth mindset and also one from Ping Lu here. Let's start with this. Jeffrey, why don't you take this question, and then Patty, you can take the growth mindset question. And then we're at the very end of our conversation. So one thing, Jeffrey, that you would say, advice for entrepreneurs to harness power?
So many startups and entrepreneurs actually, believe it or not, have implemented the 7 rules of power. So I'm not going to go over the 7 rules of power. We don't have time to do that. I would say that what works for power inside an organization also works to make your startup more successful.
And Patty, what are your thoughts around, let's first get back to this power of growth mindset, which was an earlier question. Talk with us a little bit about how each of us, particularly as individuals, can be incorporating Carol Dweck's work around growth mindset.
Yeah, I love Carol's book, The Growth Mindset. And if there had been a book I would have wanted to have when my children were small, I wish this was a book that I would have had for them. So I believe fully the growth mindset. I believe that we have power and control over our own experience, and that much more so than we believe that we do. And I also believe that we can find moments of flow. And this goes to Jeffrey's comment too, of how can we redesign the work world. Flow means that we have long periods of time where we feel at ease, we feel engaged in the work, and we're accomplishing something. With this day and age of Slack and everything else that is happening in the world, right? The interruptions come nonstop, the reminders, the interruptions. There's very little time for flow in modern day work. And how can we not only find longer periods of flow, and hopefully all of you have flow at some moments in your day, have longer periods of flow, and start understanding our mind and our mindset in a broader way.
So we can implement Reznicki's work around job crafting as individuals, but also leaders can be thinking about that with their teams. So Jeffrey, how can people follow your work? I mean, I know, for example, they can certainly watch Pfeffer on Power podcast and look up any of your 16 books. Where else can people follow you?
I have a website, jeffreypfeffer.com, and you can also find me through my homepage at Stanford. So I'm pretty easy to find. And also, if you do a Google search, you'll find all of this.
And Patty, again, reminder to all of our listeners that you have a course that starts on Tuesday. How can people follow your work?
I hope that you'll follow me just on LinkedIn. I'm not incredibly sophisticated on the speaker piece, but I'm very passionate about this course. I've made it very economical for anyone that wants to tap into the power of our thoughts.
And our next time that we meet is on December 11th. We'll be talking about the idea of finding hope with CEO Scott McGowan. Looking forward to seeing all of our listeners again. I want to thank our amazing guests today, Patty Purper Vries and Dr. Jeffrey Pfeffer. Thank you both for joining in our conversation today about understanding our power. Thank you to all of our listeners, and apologies that we did not get to all of the comments and questions, but certainly let's keep the conversation going. Thank you, Patty and Jeffrey, and thank you, everybody else. See you next time.
Thank you.